Ocean Infinity, which was mandated for the research. The two closest stations are each 10, okay, in the Ascension Islands, 6,000 kilometers away. Okay, we have a north and south triplets of hydrophones. And when you look at the propagation path to that stations here, you have a partial blockage here by the Rio Grande rise that you can see also here on the vertical profiles, which are extracted here, okay, where you have this big bathymetric structure which penetrates inside the Thofar channel. Then you have the Crozet Island station, almost 8,000 kilometers away, okay. You have quite a clear path, okay, and a stable and cold Thofar channel. And then you have the Diego Garcia station, which is completely blocked by South Georgia here, and that you can see here on the vertical profiles. So on that slide, we compare the signals and the spectrograms on 5 minutes of signals for Thunderun and calibration events, and for the two stations H10 and H4. So as you can see, you have a very good, they are very comparable signal, okay, between the two events. And the signals exhibit some long-range propagation signatures that are typically generated by impulsive source. We have short duration arrivals from 10 seconds to 30 seconds. We have broadband signals also from 1 Hertz to 80 Hertz, okay, with very nice spectrum scalloping structure here, which are typical to underwater explosions. We have a nice, strong dispersion here that you can observe on H4 at 8,000 kilometers. And you have larger amplitudes for the Thunderun signals. So at these points, from that comparisons, you can see that the calibration, we can see from that comparisons of Thunderun with the calibration gluonide, we can confirm the hypothesis that we have an impulsive source and maybe explosive with the spectrum scalloping with a larger energy for the Thunderun. And the simulation confirmed that hypothesis. So if we perform some broadband range-dependent full waveform modeling, okay, to the station H4 and H10, up to 30 Hertz with a parabolic equation tool codes, we can see that we have a very good agreement between the recorded signals that we have in purple and the synthetic signal here in yellow. And if we take the example of H4 station here, you can see that we have a very good agreement between the shapes and the duration of the recorded and the simulated waveforms. And also, we can restore very well the frequency contents of both signals here. You can see the nice synthetic, on the synthetic spectrograms here, the dispersion. However, even if these results are pretty good, it's important to mention that these simulations have also some limitations, and that we cannot fix or determine the event depth and the mechanism type from that observations. And also that the velocity models do not explain the arrival times, because here we have shifted the signal on the peaks here, but we have a small shift. So this model, these velocity models cannot be used to constrain efficiently the location. So the array processing was performed for the first arrival of the Thunderun signals with the DTK PMCC software, okay, from 1 Hertz to 40 Hertz. And this software is packaged in NDC in a box, so it's accessible to any NDC. With the new hydroacoustic support since last year, which was supported by the CTBTO. Okay, so we have a stand, a booth, so we would be very happy if you want to come to make you a small demonstration of that tools. And you have a snapshot of these tools here. And you can see from that analysis that it provides some high-resolution picture of the coherent acoustic wave field in the time frequency space. And typically on that event, we can see some very nice detection results that revealed some detailed propagation features with very well-defined backADMS, so within 0.1 degree. A nice time variation of the trace velocity with time here, which decreases time, which is a propagation effect, which is very well modeled, and also the frequency dispersion, which is also visible at the detection level. So from that results, we can use the peaks in time and the obtained backADMS to locate, okay? Unfortunately, the problem is very badly constrained because we have only 3 stations with 2 almost collocated and very large propagation ranges. So this makes the location results very sensitive to the uncertainties. Okay? And these uncertainties are attributed to the model, so which are velocity models and Adams deviations with the vertical refractions, and also attributed to measure uncertainties with peakings in time and back Adams. So the obtained location in orange here is very close to the REB solution. However, the location ellipse remains very large, especially for a research area. So to refine this location, we have extended the array processing over longer time periods. And we have identified 14 arrivals, okay, which arrive after the first arrival here. You can see here on H10, all these arrivals are associated to SnT1. And they correspond to reflections on a set of bathymetric structures that you can see as points here. So these reflections occur on islands, on seamounts, and also on the South American continental slope when you have a lot of reflections here. And of course, all these reflections contain information about the location of the events, but not all contain the same precision to constrain the location. Indeed, only small-size point source reflectors are really constraining the location because you only have a small uncertainties which are associated to the location of the reflector, okay? And so only pass 2 and 3, which are in yellow here, respect these conditions. And because the devil is in the details, only 2 paths are selected, even if the corresponding signals and detections are very small here. They occur just after. So here are the results of a relocation using these direct arrivals and the 2 reflectors, okay? So we make the inversion jointly, I think it's quite an original method, of both SnT1 and calibration unknown parameters. So we try to determine the latitude, longitude, origin time of the SnT1, the origin time of the calibration, which is inaccurate, and also, very important, the velocity models. And we obtain here the green location, okay? So the size of this ellipse is 10 times smaller than the orange one. And it's very interesting to see that this position, the center of the ellipse, is located 3.5 kilometers from the wreck which has been found. And it's important to mention that this result was obtained in May 2019, so 6 months before the submarine was found. So if you want to learn more about the source mechanism, what happened, we applied some Kepstral analysis on the calibration, first on the calibration granite to validate the method. So this is a signal processing technique which is dedicated to detect echoes on a signal that is commonly used to detect and discriminate explosive source in hydroacoustic with pulsations of bubbles. So here we have the Kepstrom of the direct arrival here on H10. And all the peaks, the 6 first peaks, can be explained by the simulations for the given yield and depths of the grenade calibration. So this validates the method. And now if you look at Kepstrograms here, we just described the evolution of the Kepstrom as a function of time. We can see that this horizontal red line corresponds to the echo, okay, that you can read here on the y-axis. And you can see on the direct arrivals and also on the reflected arrivals here. And so, if we focus on this first Kepstral peak here, once again, the calibration grenade, okay, you have exactly the same value of the Kepstral peak for all the stations and for all the reflections, okay, up to the very far away reflection here. So, for the SnT1, this is a different story. Here, you have a change, okay, the red line here changes, okay, it depends on the station and on the reflections. And it changes within 40 milliseconds. And this anisotropic behavior of these measured delays is not consistent with an explosive source. And so our interpretation is the following. So we've noticed that the echo delays, okay, vary continuously with the emission angle. Okay, here we go from 314 milliseconds to 354 milliseconds, okay, depending on path of the reflections. And we think that this is a source effect, okay? An analogy can be made with seismology, where we observe some apparent source time functions, durations which change with the station and the rupture side and kinematics. And the directivity of the echo pattern, we interpret it as two distinct events, which would be implosions, which are very close in space and time, okay? And in that case, the first capsular peak would not be associated to a bouncing effect, so a bubble pulse, but to the occurrence of two distinct events, okay, which are not bouncing. So to conclude, so our conclusion is that the SnT signals have been generated by an impulsive events, but that the small scale complexity is resolved at the capsule level, okay? And we interpret these impulsive events as two events, okay, which are close in space and time, which may be implosions. And we have seen on the picture that the submarine implodes. Thanks to a fine-tuned analysis of DTK PMCC, we have revealed some hidden signal features in the signals that are really determinant for constraining the event location. And the found location was 3.5 kilometers from a submarine wreck. So now if you want to reproduce these results, you can do it with DTK GPMCC, which is inside NDC in a box, okay? Thanks to the new hydroacoustic support, which was recently developed and funded by CTBTO. Thank you very much.
Good. Time for a few questions.
Have you looked at the design of the submarine? Are there two cabins to implode or something similar?
I'm sorry?
If you looked at the design of the submarine, so are there two cabins? You saw two events or hypothesized?
Yeah. This is something which is very hard to find on the internet. We can find that for this kind of submarine, there could be two compartments, okay, and it could match. But we're not sure of this, but it's consistent actually. The echoes would fit with the size of the submarine.
Other question? I have a question. What is the sound speed model you're using? Are you using some near real-time ocean model output?
Yes, we've tried with this, okay, and we have seen that with the simulations we are not able, it was not precise enough to recover the correct arrival time. So what we've done here, using both SnT and calibration events, we have actually invert the velocity models, okay? And here we can see the distribution of the velocity models on H4 and H10, okay? And what is very interesting actually that the problem is very sensitive to the model velocity on H4, but not on H10. Why? Because we use the reflections. So what we are sensitive to is the delays between the direct and the reflected arrivals. We are not sensitive, so for the point inside this ellipse, to the absolute value of the velocity models.
Okay, good. One more? Yeah.
How loud was the submarine going down or the explosion events? I mean, you have TL, but can you really record it that far? What intensity were you recording there?
What we think that the submarine just think, right. Okay, and so what he reached the destruction immersion, it imploded, okay? Because we've seen on the pictures, which was published by the Ocean Infinity, that it was flat, okay? And that's why we think, so it's an input, and that's also helped us to interpret the capsular peaks.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Jeff Stevens, talking about calculation of hydroacoustic propagation and conversion to seismic phases at T stations.
Let's see if I can see. Yes, good. Here, okay. So this project is on conversion of hydroacoustic to seismic phases at T stations. The IMS hydroacoustic network has a total of 11 stations. 6 of those are hydrophone stations, which are very sensitive underwater stations. The others are coastal and island T stations, seismic stations that are close to the coast and designed to record in-water phases. The problem with those is they're much less sensitive and there's very little data. In fact, there have been no confirmed recordings of in-water explosions yet at these T stations. So we're trying to understand these through simulations. So we did a similar project back in 2010 where we looked at Wake Island. There were a series of explosions off of Japan, about 200 kilograms in size, that were very clearly seen at the hydroacoustic station at Wake Island. And we had some signals that we thought might be signals from those at the Wake Island seismic station. But on closer examination, those turned out to be something else. But we did this calculation. This is similar to the calculations we're doing now that I'll describe, where we have an input starting pressure field here at the left side. This propagates through to the hydroacoustic station and then to the seismic station, and we record the signals at both places. So this is what we got for that. You can see here that this is the calculated hydroacoustic signal, which compares pretty well with the observed hydroacoustic signal from one of these events. But this is the seismic signal that we got out of the calculation. As you can see, is so close to the noise level that we really couldn't tell whether it was a good calculation or not. So we did something a little different in 2013. We developed empirical transfer functions. So what we did then was to find a large set of earthquakes that were recorded both at T stations and at another hydroacoustic station. Did a distance correction on each of them, and then took the spectral ratio to get an empirical transfer function. And the plot here on the right shows the result of that. This is the transfer function from the in-water pressure to the velocity at the T station for all of the stations in the network. So there are 5 stations, but each of them have multiple seismometers, so there are a total of 11 T station seismometers. And so this is what we got. And there's quite a bit of variability. As you can see, there's a lot more attenuation here at the Canadian station than there are at the island stations. This is a description of our current project. So this is a little more ambitious than the earlier one. The first step is to identify canonical environments, representative conditions at the 5 T stations. What that means is we're looking for those factors that affect the seismic signals at the T stations. So the slope, velocities, the in-water velocity, all the things that control those, control that signal. Now we had a dream at the beginning that we might find some simple relationship between, for example, the bathymetric slope and what we saw at the T station, and I'll show you how that worked out. Then the next thing was to collect all the environmental information we could for all of these stations and perform calculations specific to each of the T stations. We started with a generic calculation. We wanted to look at the effect of the bathymetry, particularly as a function of slope. So we did a series of calculations like this. All of them had this same input pressure profile, a Ricker wavelet with this amplitude as a function of depth. The water velocity profile we used in this region is the one that we'd used earlier for Wake Island. And then we input this at the left edge of the grid and propagated it through the water. And I'll show you how that works. They assure me that I could. I don't see a way to put this.
There, it's going.
There we go. All right, so the left one here is at for a 5-degree slope. You see as it propagates up the slope, you see reflections in the water as it gets narrower and narrower. There's some going into the land here, but at a low level. And you'll see that as it approaches the coast, it will suddenly all disassociate into a burst of energy going out There it goes. You see that nice little surface wave propagating there along the top also. And the wave propagating back through the water after the reflection. All right, if you'll play the one on the right, please. Now at 30 degrees, it looks rather different. Now, as it goes along with no change in depth, you don't see any reflections as yet. But when it gets to the slope, you'll start seeing some reflections off the slope. And this one again will disassociate when it gets to the coast, but it looks rather different. As you can see, it pretty much propagates straight down into the land, and very little of it actually gets up to the T station. So very different results between these two. This is what we got for all of them. These are the recordings at the T station, ordered by slope from 5 degrees to 30 degrees. And as you can see, there's this large surface wave that exists on some of them and is nearly absent for the others. This figure on the right shows the P wave, which is this area out in front here that's difficult to see. But there's quite a bit of variation in this too, and it's almost opposite. That is, here you see a good-sized surface wave and a small P wave. Here there's very little surface wave and a large P wave. But then you go down to 30 degrees and there's neither one. So it turns out to be rather complicated. It depends largely on how well the surface wave is generated and how coherent a phase you can get out of going into the land. So we went on from there to do the actual T stations. This is an example for HAO6 at Socorro Island in Mexico. And we gathered a lot of information about it, ocean velocities. This is showing the ocean velocities in the region where we did the calculation, but we collected those also out to a few thousand kilometers so we could get the distant path, P velocities, shear velocities, Q, bathymetry, of course. And then we did did this for each of the stations. One other thing we needed to do is generate a mesh for it after we gathered that information. Initially, we used a rectangular mesh, but the rectangular mesh gave us kind of a stair-step shape along the ocean bottom, and that turned out to give too many artificial reflections. So we used this mesh generator called Gmesh, which gave a nice smooth slope on the bottom. This example is for Wake Island. So we did a whole series of calculations. We initialized it using both Kraken and RAM. Most of these we use at a generic distance of 3,000 kilometers away, but shorter than that if the path didn't go that far, unobstructed. Did this for all 11 stations. Did it for 2 source depths at 60 meters and 3,000 meters. And I'll show an example here. Oh, and we did these with and without attenuation. With attenuation, these take a lot longer to run. But this example here does include attenuation, and this is from a 3,000 meter deep explosion source, 500 kilometers to the north. So can you run that, please? So this is similar to what we saw before, particularly for the 5-degree case. The green dot there is a pseudo-hydroacoustic station. We don't, of course, actually have one here. So we did a whole series of underwater locations where we saved the results and used that for calculating the transfer functions. It goes up the coast. You see a lot more happening as it goes up because there's variability and then a burst of energy towards the end, much like what we saw before. So this is the result. The results are a bit surprising, especially after our slope calculations. They're actually a lot more consistent. There's a fair amount of variability. There's about 20 dB variability between the highest amplitude and the lowest amplitude, but they're pretty much flat with frequency if we don't include attenuation. I think the reason is the source coming in is much more dispersed, so there's less opportunity to get a coherent arrival to get constructive and destructive interference, so the results are actually more consistent for the actual bathymetry than it was for our slope calculations. When we include attenuation, we do get a lot more drop-off with frequency, as you can see, and results that are quite good, quite close to what we observed earlier with our empirical results. Did one more calculation. We wanted to try and find ways to validate these. There were a series actually of five-ton explosions off the coast of Florida that generated nice hydroacoustic signals at the Ascension Island hydroacoustic station and what appeared to be T phases at the Ascension Island station. Now, on closer examination, one of those wasn't visible, and two of them had interfering arrivals that obscured the T phase. But two of them looked pretty clean, so we calculated these. In this case, we used the parabolic equation code RAM. What you can see here, the picture on the left shows the transmission loss at 20 hertz calculated with RAM. We used that to calculate all frequencies because we needed time series. And then the right-hand side of this left plot is the left-hand side of this. This was the input to the Ascension Island calculation. And shown here on the right is what that looks like at the point where the incoming wave disassociates. The locations of the stations here are arranged so that this one is the T station's at its actual location with the actual topography, the island. The hydroacoustic station is placed at a location that's the same distance from the source as the actual source was, so that we can get a good understanding of the difference in arrival times. These are the results. So what we're showing here on the top are the observed signals, and on the bottom are the calculations. So these are the two good events. This is what the hydrophone signals looked like. This is what the seismic signals looked like. All of these are filtered from 6 to 10 hertz. That's where we had data that you could see, and pretty clean signals over that frequency band. Our calculations, the pressure is pretty comparable to what was observed, and the T station signal is also quite comparable to what was observed. There may be a little bit more dispersion in this, but it's hard to tell with the noise, and the amplitudes are quite comparable in both of them. Also, the arrival time, the difference in arrival time between the two phases in the calculations is very close to what you see in the data. So this validates two things. One is this confirms that really is a T station at that island from the in-water explosion. And the second thing is it shows our calculations are giving results that appear to be consistent with reality. So thank you.
We have time for maybe one question. Over here on the...
Microphone?
Thank you, very nice. You showed the vertical component of the seismic station. Is
Right.
there any additional value in analyzing the horizontal components too?
Yes, I mean we do calculate both. I just chose to show the vertical because that's usually what we look at on seismometers. But they're both calculated. They're pretty similar.
Okay, one really quick question.
Okay. Do you believe there is any value in perhaps adding 2 more stations to the T phases that are already there and use some sort of array approach for the detection of T phases? Or would the coherence not allow to do that?
That's a good question. They probably have to be pretty close together. I can check, of course, and see if we get anything between the actual locations where they are, where the seismometers are, and see if they're coherent enough. But I haven't done that.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Next presentation by Georgios Haralabos, CTBTO's contribution to the search of the missing Argentine submarine San Juan.
Okay, hello. This is the second of 3 presentations about the Argentine submarine San Juan. So inevitably there is some overlap, but the particular presentation is focusing on CTBTO's contribution as the search and rescue for the submarine was going on. And from the number of co-authors, you can understand that it was a huge effort in-house. And as you all know, the submarine started, was supposed to be an 11-day voyage from Ushuaia to Mar del Plata was the base, but on the 7th day, the unfortunate event took place. The last contact position is indicated on the map, and the approximate location of hydroacoustic signals that detected an acoustic anomaly from 2 stations, the one at Crozet, southern Indian Ocean, and Ascension Island, mid-Atlantic. For completeness, this is the hydroacoustic component of the International Monitoring System. We have 11 stations. 6 are cable hydrophone stations, and 5 are T stations. This presentation is dealing with data only from the Ascension Island and for the Crozet Island stations, which the stations that actually detected the signal related to the submarine event. So on November 15th, a signal of unknown origin was detected, but for the localization of the signal, there was a lot of work that needed to be done, and new scripts need to be written, and because we had to make sure that we're talking about the same events for both stations, we have to make sure about the nature of the event to the best of our capability, and we have to refine the localization of the event so that we can contribute to the efforts that were going on. At the same time, an international effort led by the Argentine government, Argentine Navy. To help us in this effort, on December 1st, there was a calibration experiment, if you wish, a SAS charge that was deployed and deployed by the Argentine Navy, and was detected by the same 2 stations of the IMS network, and the estimated location, because for the calibration event, of course, we knew where it was deployed. We found that it was localized approximately 37 kilometers east of the actual location. That increased the confidence, of course, in the results and the analysis that was going on in parallel. This is the time series recorded from both events. The top row refers to the submarine event. The bottom row has to do with the calibration experiment. And you can see from the characteristics of the time signals that we are talking about an impulsive event. It's short in duration, it's large in amplitude, and the takeaway message from this analysis is basically it was possible to associate the recordings from the stations to the same event by analyzing the arrival times. That was very important because you have to realize that these are the first data analysis that were conducted on this event. So verification tests had to be performed. This is analysis of the signals. This is autocorrelation and cepstral analysis. And here you have the submarine event on the left column and the calibration experiment on the right column. And you can see that the autocorrelation indicates an echo with a delay of 0.32 seconds approximately, which is compatible with the cepstrum analysis, and that's for the submarine event. For the calibration experiment, we have a delay of 0.45 seconds, compatible with the cepstrum analysis, and of course compatible with an oscillating bubble, as you expect for an underwater explosion for the calibration event. It's not very clear what was the source mechanism of the actual event of the submarine. It's very interesting that these time delays, they were preserved over long propagation distances, because here we're talking about 6,000 kilometers to Ascension and 7,700 kilometers to Crozet Islands, but we were not surprised because we saw similar time delay preservation also from other experiments from Japan all the way to Robinson Crusoe Island in previous work. So that was also something that we felt comfortable with. Of course, you cannot draw any conclusions about the absolute strength of the source by analyzing the received signal. However, modeling work that was conducted at the time for the propagation path to Ascension, H810, indicated that a shallow depth source, approximately at 50 meters, will result in 15 dB lower received level than the deeper source. Just to give you an idea of what propagation characteristics one needs to keep in mind. You have seen the systematic PMCC analysis from Julian's presentation, which was been conducted and has been used in his case to analyze the sequence of reflections and late arrivals. And this is the calibrated spectrograms for both signals. Again, you see the submarine event on the top row and the calibration experiment on the bottom row. And there are a few things that one can immediately observe when we compare mainly the H10 north, which is a better reception, to the Crozet, the H04 south. You can tell that the attenuation of the high frequencies was more severe for the path to Crozet. Also, you can see by the width of the signal that there was a stronger propagation dispersion to Crozet compared to Ascension. What cannot be seen with naked eye now by looking at this is that the actual total amount of energy that arrived at Crozet was higher than the one that arrived at Ascension. That was very, very interesting. And another thing that was very interesting, but at the time we didn't have time to look into that in details because we had to provide information and do, as I said, contribute to the rescue, but it's the the only slide that has post-analysis, let's say, or initial results. It's something strange that we saw in the signal that arrive at Crozet here. There's a precursor that you cannot see the way to ascension. And the first hypothesis for that, and further work needs to be done on this, is that this geodesic propagation path crosses the Antarctic ice sheet, therefore it speeds up, the signal speeds up, therefore arrives faster at Crozet. And that's the best hypothesis why we have something arrive before the main arrival. And again, this is work that needs to be continued. So once we identified the events, signal characteristics, everything that needed to be, all the checks that need to be done in order to verify that we're talking about the same event for those two stations, then there was the second effort in order to reduce the uncertainty about the location. And in that effort, two non-IMS seismic stations that recorded this event were brought into picture, and the data were fused to try to reduce the uncertainty around the location of the event. Tornquist and Mount Kent, that's where they were located. The Mount Kent seismic station had a very low signal-to-noise ratio, did not contribute much, but main contribution came from Tornquist, and it was quite considerable. Here you can see the reduction in the localization uncertainty offered by incorporating the analysis of the seismic stations into the hydroacoustic data analysis. So you can see that we have a reduction of order of magnitude. I mean, we go from a semi-major aerial ellipse of close to 500 kilometers to something close to 20 kilometers. So that is quite impressive and also quite useful for the purpose. This is a summary of the same exercise also for the calibration experiment. So the yellow ellipse is for the calibration test, and this one is for the submarine event. And you can see that you can observe basically similar improvement into the localization performance. And all of this information was obviously contributed to the Argentine authorities in a timely fashion. So the conclusions is that of course, signals that were recorded on the 15th of November from two IMS hydroacoustic stations verified that they originated in the vicinity of the last known position of the submarine Ara San Juan, and we have the reception of the signals 3.5 hours after the last contact that the submarine made with its base. No definite conclusion can be drawn as to the nature of the source. Further analysis may point in certain directions, but until we are 100% sure, we'll stay with that statement. The calibration test that conducted by the Argentine Navy proved that our system worked very well, and we had a detection 37 kilometers close to the declared location. The contribution from the non-IMS seismic stations were considerable, as you saw, into the reduction of the uncertainty around the event. Of course, the Argentine authorities were timely informed about it, and 1 year later on, the submarine was found at 900 meters depth in a very complex bathymetry full of underwater ravines and so forth, and it was extremely near to the location that was originally provided by the CTBTO. I'll stay here. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. One question. Back here on the right.
Thank you. It was terrific to see CTBTO's contribution to the recovery efforts. So the detection and location of an underwater test is probably even more important than for other tests because of the dispersive nature of such tests. And so the timeliness of the detection is very important. What lessons have we learned about how quickly underwater test locations can be determined and how the CTBT can improve in that regard?
Thank you for the question. I wish that it's one answer that can fit all cases, because as you very well know, every source and every instance has its own characteristics, and it depends on the event, how quickly and how accurately the detection can take place. Of course, we offer coverage of the oceans with our stations, but then the different propagation characteristics, different bathymetry, different source characteristics dictate what the reaction will be. And I don't think I'm saying something new. I mean, this is everything you see in your labs. But I would agree with you that any calibration experiment that we can have will absolutely help in tuning and verifying the capabilities of the hydroacoustic network.
I'd just like to make a comment that I think the hypothesis that ice is influenced or producing that precursor ought to be pursued. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks again. Or yes, okay, one more.
Can I add just one comment here also? We have to remember that the CTBT IMS stations are designed to detect nuclear explosions. This here is a special event. So if it was a nuclear explosion that was triggered in that location, I wouldn't have a doubt that it
No,
was.
that is true, but I think the gentleman referred to other than primary mission events, if I understood properly. I mean, if you met nuclear explosions, then apologies, I misunderstood your question, and Peter's answer stands that will be immediate. But since here we're discussing about a byproduct of the detection capability of our system, then it depends on the location of the nature of the event.
Good, thank you. Our next speaker, Casey Ho. Okay, good. Hydroacoustic signatures, petition for social change, curating hydroacoustic data to strengthen the implementation of environmental dimensions of the SDGs. Casey.
Yes, that's quite a wordy title. And good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Looking forward to the fourth day of the conference for a long time now. Oh, there it is. So for today's presentation, this is a brief outline, starting with the benefits of my project to the CTBTO, as I am here as part of the Innovation Challenge organized by the youth group, and to briefly introduce the Hydroacoustics Network, to talk about the synthesis of the value of the IMS HA network and the SDGs, using mainly scientific and civil applications of research highlights, what I would call translating scientific outputs, research outputs into issue-driven solutions in the SDG context, and even more context on the policy and technical context. So this is probably going to be reinforced through my presentation. Previous speakers have introduced the hydroacoustics network very well. I just want to specify that I am looking at specifically the 6 hydrophone stations that are underwater. So this is basically like the overall picture that I want to present for my presentation, and in the next few minutes I will be going into the specific boxes and looking at existing research examples that support this integration of between the CTBTO's work and also the Sustainable Development Goals, focusing on goals particularly 13, 14, and 11. So just a quick review of the 2 targets I'll be looking at under the SDG 13, strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards, and promoting mechanisms for raising capacity for effective climate change-related planning and management. So there are a few reasons to be concerned and to tie really to see how the CTBTO could be leveraged in this context. One is that measurements of temperature variations are necessary to quantify air-to-sea heat exchange for calibrating climate change models. And also, in contrast to ocean surface temperatures, deep ocean temperatures cannot be readily inferred from satellite-based remote sensing methods. Also, monitoring baselines need to be established, in this case, the baseline of ambient noise in the ocean soundscapes. So, looking at a research example from 2015, we see that ambient noise from the IMS hydroacoustic records can be used to develop passive acoustic thermometry, improving precision in the global monitoring of deep ocean temperature variations and complementing existing remote sensing methods. In this research shown, they saw a high correlation between the Argo floats and also passive thermometry using IMS data, for example. Again, another research from 2015 studied how characteristics of low-frequency coherent arrivals from ambient noise fields differed depending on station configurations, including the orientation of hydrophone pairs with broadband sources. And so really the scale of the IMS HA station network makes it possible to carry out a systematic comparison of multiple deep water sites around the world so that broader recommendations can be made for the deployment of future deep water hydrophone arrays for monitoring applications. In terms of establishing monitoring baselines of ocean soundscapes, we see noise generation as a function of iceberg volume and rate of disintegration, and also that the variability in soundscapes is associated with variations in natural events, such as the life cycle of Antarctic icebergs. And so we see, for example, in this diagram, how the hydroacoustic data can be used to combine and complement with other remote sensing methods that are satellite-based and radar-based, and that's just wonderful. Moving on to SDG 14, I'm looking at 4 of the targets. One, reducing marine pollution of all kinds. Another is strengthening the resilience and restoration for marine ecosystems. Another is conserving marine areas based on the best available scientific information. and another is in increasing scientific knowledge, developing research capacity, and the transfer of marine technology, especially to enhance biodiversity, the contribution of biodiversity to the development of developing countries. So a lot of the stations seem very remote, but actually based on their locations, a lot of them are located in marine parks, monuments, and reserves, and they can be used to verify that noise levels in those oceans do not pose disturbance to whales and other noise-sensitive species that are frequenting those areas. Another use of the data is to use vocalizations to study whale population structure, particularly in revealing knowledge about their demographics. And what we saw in this paper from 2018 is that they observed frequency changes in whale vocalizations, but it was not due to increased environmental noise in this case. And I think that's a rather different narrative there. And also that the changes, especially in conformity, in unison, demonstrate social learning and cultural transmission within the Sri Lankan population, the Indian Ocean. In this paper in 2018, we saw a pilot study, first time using CTBTO data fully for cetacean density estimation, presenting a new method of using acoustic data to collect information about the spatial distribution of the fin whales, which are highly endangered. What they noticed is that the monitoring area at Wake Island was smaller than anticipated in comparison to the detection ranges at other sites, and they showed the importance of further quantifying the size and shape of the monitored area, for example. By looking at the research done using IMS data, we see also favorable and encouraging trends in reducing marine pollution of all kinds, including low-frequency, deep water ambient sounds. And so, complementing previous studies which looked at trends of ocean sound mainly in the Northeast Pacific and Indian Oceans, we actually see a decrease in the South Atlantic and Equatorial Pacific, which shows that the importance of really pushing for inclusion in oceanographic studies. Looking at SDG 11, many have talked about this before, but we do see that the hydroacoustic station data can contribute to the characterization and study of tsunamigenic events, including the 2004 Sumatra earthquake, 2015 Chile earthquake, and also in 2010, underwater volcanic eruptions in the Mariana Islands. This has also been a highlight emphasis in this year's conference, talking about the arrangement between the CTBTO and 15 countries now, latest edition of Madagascar, to improve the assessment of disaster risk reduction due to tsunamis. So moving more into the policy part of my presentation, we see that actually in terms of integrating the environmental dimensions of the SDGs, the green here and also the yellow are of interest. Green is the identification of appropriate monitoring indicators, and the yellow being the cost of collecting environmental data. And throughout the policy cycle, but especially in monitoring and evaluation, I think that there's a lot to be done still in tracking progress in the SDGs. We see regional disparities and data data availability to determine the status of SDG progress. This picture is looking at Asia and the Pacific, and you see for SDG 13 that there is 0% of data available to determine the current status. So there are a few different kinds of frameworks and mechanisms that the CTBTO could align with to further their work, especially to in the spirit of leaving no one behind. And I would like to talk a little bit more about the UN Decade of Ocean Science and also what I've learned from this global ocean science report. So a little bit more, the UN Decade of Ocean Science is led by the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, and in the year 2019, we are currently in the middle of the planning phase to develop an implementation plan for the decade. They defined 8 ocean science categories and identified and quantifying the elements that drive productivity and performance of ocean science. And the 8 categories are to the right, and you see that long strip ocean observation and marine data is pretty much underlying the remaining 7 categories. So when you look at the state of ocean science, we see that scientific output and productivity are led by a few countries overall. Look at expenditure and gender, you see a picture of the state of ocean science currently. So what we can do is, I think, look at the existing VDEC hydroacoustic contracts to understand more about who are using the IMS data through the VDEC platform, which areas of ocean science have been enriched by IMS hydroacoustic data, and also think about how to move forward. For example, aligning outreach efforts with the SDG goals to diversify demographics involved in ocean science. And also to look at when we look at physical data, that's kind of the most dominant data type, acoustics being included in one of them, but how much of that is acoustics at the deep ocean level and on such a broad global monitoring scale. So there are, the last, I guess, program I want to mention is the UN Oceans, composed of many, many different programs, but for the UN Ocean Decade, they identified 16 that are relevant. Among these 16 programs, the IAEA has a marine environment laboratory in Monaco. That is the only marine laboratory under the UN system. And I think that with what the CTBTO can offer on a technical and expertise level, for sure, there's a lot of, there's a unique position there to be leveraged. I'm going to skip this slide a little bit. But some concluding remarks, I think that in order of priority and emphasis to strengthen the links between the CTBTO and the SDGs, you have to look at community, look at the user relationships, interagency coordination, context, position, how can CTBTO leverage its unique value, and also I hope that at the end, just to say, my project could bring more visibility to the whole IMS hydroacoustic network. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Question? I'd just like to make another comment similar to one I made before, that the using an active source to, in that case, measure perhaps ice coverage, well, that could be extended to measure, as you say, using passive methods, you can measure temperature, but with active methods also using CTBT hydrophones, you could get much more coverage and resolution and accuracy of ocean temperature changes.
Thank you for your feedback.
Okay, good, thank you. Our next speaker is Nikita Pinto, Distributed Detection Framework and Three-Dimensional Propagation Model for Acoustic Detection of Baleen Whales. Nikita?
Hello. Yeah. A very good morning to everyone and a warm welcome to my talk titled Detecting Pygmy Blue Whales in the Central Indian Ocean. Okay. My name is Nikita Pinto. I am a master's student. I'm presenting this work that I've co-authored with my research advisor, Dr. Tarun Chandraidula. We are from the Department of Ocean Engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT Madras. So, as we all know, the CTBTO has this global network of hydroacoustic stations. There are 6 of these stations distributed globally. Our work is interested in data coming from one of these hydrophone stations, namely the Diego Garcia hydrophone station. So if you see Diego Garcia, is located somewhere 7 degrees south of the equator. To the north you have the Maldives and Sri Lanka. So the Diego Garcia hydroacoustic station comprises of 2 triads, one to the north of the island and one to the south of the island. So the average depths for these 2 hydrophone triads are around 1,200 meters and 1,400 meters from the water surface. These hydrophone stations have been in operation since 2002, providing us a treasure trove of data. So what we are interested in from this data are these 3 types of whale calls, namely the Sri Lankan call, the unidentified, because it's yet to be attributed to a particular whale species, and the Madagascan call. So what these plots show you are, on the top, there's a time series of the sound intensity level. On the x-axis is the time in seconds for this case. On the y-axis is the intensity in dB level. The box below that, the square plot, shows you the spectrogram, which is obtained from the short-time Fourier transform of the signal. What it tells us is the frequency content and how that content varies with time. So again, on the x-axis, we have time. On the y-axis, frequency. The color code here indicates the strength of the signal or the energy at those frequencies. So if you look at the Sri Lankan call, there are 4 components. We're interested in 2 of these 4, namely the 60 Hertz component and the 100 Hertz component. These are tonal in nature. In the unidentified call, there is just a single component which has a frequency content of somewhere between 25 to 45 Hertz. This looks more of a smudge. It's really not similar to what we'd see in the Sri Lankan call, but it looks more of a smudge concentrated somewhere around 40 Hertz. The next call, the Madagascan call, is also different from the Sri Lankan, but not so different from the unidentified, as you can see. The frequency content here is somewhere between 35 Hertz, going up till about 50 Hertz. So these calls, these are isolated calls that are up on the slide. But when we look at the data, we get hundreds of calls, even up to 1,000 calls in a day. So we're interested in visualizing what these calls look like on a larger time scale. And to do that, this slide shows the same spectrogram plots, but now they've been averaged over 2-hour intervals. So what this operation of averaging does, it really brings out the strong energy components at the frequencies that we see in the data set. So the top plot shows the average spectrogram over a year. that is from Jan to December of 2013 at the North Hydrophone. The plot below that shows the same date, shows the same time scale for the year 2013 at the South Hydrophone. And in black, we have annotated the different types of calls that we see and the times of the year when they occur in this data set. Interestingly, there is a time of the year at the North Hydrophone where we can see a mix of these Madagascan and unidentified whale calls. Another thing I would like to draw your attention to is the unidentified whale call, which is spotted somewhere in October at both the North Hydrophone and at the South Hydrophone. So we're interested in what is going on, which way, how are these whale calls being detected at both the hydrophones. And in order to do that, we were interested to see if we're actually picking up the same calls at both these hydrophones. To do that, we built a 3D propagation model to measure the diffraction of sound in the parts between these two islands. Now, what we noticed is that, sure, there is diffraction at very low frequencies, but at these frequencies that we're interested in, anything above 25 to 30 hertz, there is no diffraction. So there is probably something going on with the whale's movement in this area. So, like I said, these averaging operations of the spectrograms really bring out the strong signal contents at whatever frequencies are dark in this plot. So, sure, we see whale calls in these areas, but we're also seeing a lot of additional dark orange in these plots. And these are not whale calls. These are caused by interference in the form of shipping noise, something called air gunning, seismic activity. So as the slide is titled, this presents us with our first challenge in dealing with this data. We have all these interfering noisy events. Another challenge that this data set provides is in the form of an SNR, or a signal-to-noise ratio variability across hydrophones. Now, these plots show the same call, Sri Lankan blue whale call, recorded at 3 hydrophones of the same triad at the North Station. And what we can see is the call is quite visible at the second station, at the second hydrophone, N2, not so much at N1 or N3. So this presents our second challenge in dealing with the data. Now, in order to build detectors for these whale calls, we need to understand what they look like. We need to have models for them. And so we borrowed some classical signal processing theory to come up with a matrix modeling for these whale calls. So the matrix model is in the form of a whale call signal is given by an H matrix theta plus some Gaussian noise. So on the plot on the left, shows you a single unidentified call. And like I said, the unidentified calls have a smudgy nature. They're not very easy to resolve into simpler components. So in order to tackle this, we borrowed a technique that is commonly used in speech signal processing, developed by Macaulay and Quartieri in their 1986 paper. So what their frequency tracking algorithm does is it comes up with a frequency estimate using frequency tracks from the spectrogram data. So what we did is we took 50 unidentified calls from the 2013 data set. We ran them through the frequency tracker and then averaged across these tracks to come up with a final approximation for our unidentified call. A similar thing was done for the Madagascan call. So when we average across these calls, the resulting tracks give us information in the form of sinusoids that are time limited. We use this information to construct an H matrix that contains the information of the sinusoids and their time widths. So how do we use this H matrix or this call model that we have in building the detectors? Again, we've borrowed from statistical signal processing theory, and turns out that the optimal detector for our configuration of a matrix model and Gaussian noise, the optimal detector is given by something called a math subspace detector. So if you can see the pH here in the numerator and also in the denominator, the pH is nothing but a projection matrix that projects any signal onto the subspace spanned by our matrix H. So what we do is we pass the signal through our subspace detector, and at the output here, we get a ratio of the energy contained in the subspace of the signal to that of the energy that is not in the subspace of the signal. This metric is then passed on to a threshold detection and to decide whether a call may be present or not. So in setting a threshold, in the operation of subjecting our detector outputs to a threshold, we may encounter two types of errors. A type 1 error is one of a false detection. No call is present, but our detector may be triggered to say that a call is present. A type 2 error is one in which we have a misdetection. So there is a call present, but it's not being triggered, our detector doesn't get triggered by it, and hence we miss the call. So our setting of the threshold needs to find a trade-off between these two errors. The way that we have set our thresholds for this work is by borrowing from statistical signal processing theory. We know the distribution functions of the detector outputs, and we accordingly set a threshold that ensures or that gives us a fixed false alarm rate. So these detectors were built using, like I said, statistical signal processing theory under the assumption of Gaussian noise. But if you can remember, I told you about the two challenges that we see in the data set, these broadband noisy events and the SNR variability. So in order to adapt these detectors for our problem, we've had to make a few modifications. So the first modification is tackles the problem, the challenge of broadband interfering events. We use the math subspace framework to measure signal energy in two bands. The first band we look at is that of the bandwidth of the signal call. So for example, if we're interested in the unidentified call, our signal band is from 20 hertz to 50 hertz. And we look at the neighboring bands to get an estimate of the so what we do is we take the ratio of the energy in this signal band to a neighboring band to get an estimate of that ratio. We do this in 30-minute segments. So, and the way we implement it is we take a day's worth of data, we run the detector in 30-minute segments. If the ratio is higher than 0 dB, there is probably a call present, and we go in and further process the data. If it's less than 0 dB, it's more likely that it's just a noisy event, and we ignore that data segment. Now, noise and interference can also crop up in a more subtle way, in the form of, here we see interfering calls between the unidentified and the Madagascan call. Now, these are very closely spaced in terms of their frequency content. So we've also used the math subspace approach to compare the energies in the subspace of the unidentified call to that of the Madagascan call. We do this comparison to finally come up at each detector with a decision of whether or not an unidentified call is present or a Madagascan call is present. So these two strategies help us tackle the first challenge of the interference that is seen in the data set. Coming to the second challenge, which is the SNR variability across hydrophones within a triad. In order to tackle this challenge, what we've chosen to do is to fuse decisions of each detector, both across frequency components and across the hydrophones in a triad. So this block diagram shows you the implementation for the Sri Lankan blue whale call. And what we do is we build the 60 hertz detector, the 100 hertz detector, fuse across the hydrophones, and then fuse those final decisions to make a decision about whether the call is present or not. So these detectors that we've built with their associated distribution strategies and the fusion rules were then tested on a testing data set, which I will be referring to as a ground truth data set. Now, this was a meticulously compiled set of noisy events, of whale calls that came at differing signal-to-noise ratios. So I'll spend a few seconds on this slide to go through the metrics here. On the left-hand side, we have the detection rates or the probabilities of detection. On the right-hand side are the false alarm rates or the probabilities of false alarm. So the plot in blue, they represent the Sri Lankan blue whale call. In red represent the unidentified call, and in black represent the Madagascan call. The dotted line represents implementing a single 100 Hertz detector at one hydrophone, no distributed detection and no fusion rules. So what we see is probabilities of detection, which were originally somewhere at around 45%, now shoot up to 90% using these fusion strategies. However, unfortunately, there is also an increase in the false alarm rates from 1% to somewhere around 9%. But I think the main value comes in terms of the increased detection probabilities. For the Madagascan and the unidentified calls, what we see is that implementing these single detectors at a single hydrophone do give us good performance. And when we apply our distributed detection rules and fusion rules, what we see is that we only get a marginal increase in the probabilities of detection. The real value in implementing these detectors can be seen on the plot in the right. So where we have a false alarm rate of somewhere around 9%, now drops down to just around 3%, and a false alarm rate of somewhere around 10% drops down to 5%. So why this happens is because we now have the ability to distinguish between these two types of calls. We're able to ignore those, leave out those false alarms that arise from the mixing and interlacing of these calls. Just 2 slides to go. So after we ran these detectors on the ground truth data set and we saw the improved performance matrix, we ran it on a year's worth of data at the Diego Garcia station. So on the left-hand side panel are the plots, call detection numbers. These are weekly call detection numbers observed at the north hydrophone, and on the right are the call detection numbers observed at the south hydrophone. So if we look at the Sri Lankan blue whale call, we notice immediately that there are much higher numbers detected at the north hydrophone. And not just numbers, we also get an idea of the seasonality of these calls when they are being picked up by the hydrophone stations. The unidentified call also registers higher numbers. I apologize for the difference in the scales here. Here we're going up till 15,000, here till 4,000. This is just to bring back to the point that I stressed in the third slide, where I showed you the yearly spectrograms. And that's what we're observing here, this the movement between the north hydrophone and the south hydrophone by these unidentified calls. Finally, we come to the Madagascan call, which is recorded in large numbers at the north hydrophone, but it's fairly negligible at the south hydrophone. So we assume that the Madagascan calls somehow prefer the northern side of the island. So, in conclusion, we built robust matched subspace detectors and associated distributed detection and fusion rules. We applied these proposed detectors to a ground truth data set and saw an improved performance. We then applied these to a year's worth of data at the Diego Garcia stations, and these results indicate or suggest plenty of whale diversity, the types of calls that we're seeing. We're seeing many types, and also a seasonality when these calls are coming into the areas around the island. All this work has been in order to achieve a bigger aim of building something called a whale atlas for the Indian Ocean. A whale atlas is a term coined by my advisor, and we're interested in counting the number of whales in the Indian Ocean and being able to say when they're coming in, for how long they're staying. So just to tell you about what we're currently working on is using these detectors, these matched subspace detectors, and their time series outputs to come up with localization methods and strategies to localize these whales. And with that, I end. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think in the interest of time, we need to move on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Next speaker is Ryan Elliott. enabling technology to extend life and utility of hydroacoustic systems.
Good morning, and thank you for having me today. My name is Ryan Elliott. I'm a senior mechanical engineer with L3 Maripro, and my talk today is enabling technology to extend life and utility of hydroacoustic systems. See if I'm doing the right way here. Oh, thank you. Topics today are application of advances in installation technology and ocean observatory expansion to the existing hydroacoustic systems. So a hydroacoustic system consists of 3 hydrophones located in the water column in the SOFAR channel. Each they're positioned as an equilateral triangle approximately 2 kilometers apart. There are 11 systems worldwide in 6 remote locations. And the deep water deployments had an initial 25-year design life. However, recent reanalysis of them gives them approximately 100-year life for the in-water components of the system. So application of advances in installation technology. So it's been about 20 years since the first installation at Diego Garcia. There have been quite a few advances and changes in technology since then. For the installation at Crozet, this presented greater challenges than the previous 5 hydroacoustic system installations. We needed to extend the installation weather window, the upper limit, to accommodate the severe conditions at Crozet, and the weather limit being driven by the maximum allowable vessel motion during the process of lowering the nodes to the seafloor. The Beaufort scale is used to quantify weather severity. It's a standard common weather indicator. Previously, there was a Beaufort 5 threshold where if weather exceeded Beaufort 5, we could not install. For Crozet, we needed to raise that limit to a Beaufort 6 scale. And this roughly doubled the stern accelerations and the driving forces for the motion of the hydrophone through the water, or the motion of the node through the water as it was being lowered to the seafloor. On the bottom, you'll see a Beaufort 5 scale. Has a significant wave height of 1.9 to 2.4 meters. However, going to a Beaufort 6 scale gives you a significant wave height of 3.0 to 4.6 meters. Some of the things we did, we had to change the in-water components to allow us to install in Crozet. First, we had to modify the node base structure to decrease the in-water drag and also increase the net negative buoyancy of the system. We also had to increase the tension capability of the in-water components, as well as the internode cable used to lower the nodes to the seafloor. We also added position transponders to the node base. This allowed us to update the real-time modeling software we used to track the installation as both the cable and the nodes themselves were lowered to the seafloor. And then we also gained from that an accurate record of the actual node position on the seafloor. So a little bit on the bottom there is discussing the installation loads on the internode cable lowering the system. The original system, we calculated a peak dynamic load on the cable of 33 kilonewtons. And for the new Crozet system, we calculated that to be closer to 56 kilonewtons. We had to increase the strength of our lowering internode cable while maintaining the same size factor. So we had to almost double the tension capability in order to maintain our 2-to-1 factor of safety. In order to estimate the deployment nodes, we developed installation models for both the new and the original systems. We needed to predict when the slack of the lowering cable may occur for a given stern acceleration and periods during deployment. Slack line leads to a snap loading of the internode cable where tensions can instantaneously increase beyond the strength of the cable. And the nodes are lowered from the stern of the vessel, so the vessel's stern motion is the driving function. Node shape and cable properties for the original and the new systems were fed into the model for comparison to installation data recorded from previous installations. And we also plotted various forcing functions since vessel motion is variable in both period and amplitude. We monitored the pre-deployment vessel stern acceleration, so just in the hour just prior to overboarding a node, to ensure that the driving motion was below the threshold for deployment. And then we also monitor the tension during deployment to be sure it compared to our models for that node and that location, and our expected tension at a given depth as the node moves to the seafloor. So in this plot here, you can see the solid lines represent the threshold for slack criteria here. On the red is the Crozet node at full depth. The green is at mid-depth, and the purple is at the surface. The plot here with the stern accelerations on the left and the vessel period of motion at the bottom. You can see that the blue points here are actually each cycle of vessel motion during the deployment, and this is of the north number 2 node at Crozet. And a majority of the plot line of the vessel motion points fall below the slackline criteria. You can see there are a few points above the slackline criteria, and we were not concerned with a few occasional points above there. We were looking for general trends in motion. So as long as the majority of the points fell below the slackline criteria, we knew we could safely deploy. You can also see the dotted colored lines in there are the original node model that shows that the original node would have been, definitely, we would have been over conditions for that during this deployment. So other technological advances, we've been having a route working group to plan the system location and the trunk cable route, and also the cable armoring type for a longer system life. Modern higher resolution bathymetry and improved deployment modeling software allows a planned installation to avoid the seafloor features that may cause premature cable failure. Also with an increased emphasis on cable armoring schedule, it puts proper armor where needed along the cable route. Vessel position monitoring, or improved vessel positioning and control systems also reduce the value of the vessel position and speed variables, so the actual cable route matches the planned route. And then shore electronics are updated and maintained to ensure compatibility with the data center infrastructure, and also in order to apply any software security updates. Next, onto an ocean observatory. So what is an ocean observatory? An ocean observatory is a power and data hub on the seafloor, providing real-time data collection and long-term observation. This can be anything from a single node to multiple nodes covering an entire region. An observatory has the advantage of extending its utility as science interest and technology changes with time. There are wet mate connectors to allow flexibility of instrument types and connection of secondary infrastructure for expansion. This enables science to meet new and unforeseen interests by allowing evolution in subsea science over the life of the system. And also it's a persistent presence on the seafloor for long-term data acquisition, and this is a big improvement over kind of the traditional data acquisition where you apply, you add a sensor to the seafloor over the side of the boat and try to come back sometime later and hope you can recover the sensor and that it was recording your data. So here you can actually get data from the same point over extended periods of time. And other good news here for the hydroacoustic systems, this is a very similar architecture to existing hydroacoustic systems where you have a shore station, a trunk cable out, and then sensors or nodes. In this diagram of an ocean observatory, you see the two science nodes here and here, the orange bodies. Those science nodes are connected by a trunk cable back to the shore facility, and this is a series fashion depiction. And from each science node, you can attach whatever science instruments or devices you would like to. Different things, autonomous vehicle docks, oceanographic instrumentations, video and still cameras, lights, pretty much anything science can dream of to to monitor, they can attach to these observatories. My company I work for, L3 Maripro, we have over 15 years of experience providing largest cable ocean observing systems deployed to date. We have worked with systems installed with over 1,500 kilometers of cable, capacities up to 10 gigabit data transfer, 10 kilovolt operating voltage, and shore facilities that support over 1,500 kilowatts of power. On the left, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. The Mars system is a single node at the end of a single cable. Here is the Neptune Canada, where it is a ring architecture, where each node has 2 paths back to shore with cable for redundancy. That way, if you lose one node or a cable segment, you can still operate the entire system. And on the right here is the RSN, or Ocean Observatories Initiative system, which consists of 2 strings of nodes in the, off of the Pacific Northwest of the United States. If you can see in this image here, this is the Juan de Fuca plate with the RSN system down here and the Neptune Canada system up here. So the entire Juan de Fuca plate is now covered by an observatory, enabling science, especially seismic sensors, to detect and characterize the entire plate. One thing, Maripro, we only worked on the mechanical in-water components for the Mars and the Neptune system. However, we designed, built, and installed the complete RSN system. So, ocean observatory expansion, capabilities of hydroacoustic systems can be enhanced through the addition of observatory nodes along the trunk cable. The observatory infrastructure will support many instrument types. And trunk cable damage is the most likely cause of hydroacoustic system failure, where a cable repair mission allows an opportunity to add observatory components to the system, and where one of the main issues is the vessel is the single highest cost of operation of a hydroacoustics installation and maintenance. An observatory infrastructure allows a faster connection of a new or next generation hydroacoustic system. However, an observatory must not interfere with a hydroacoustic system, so the addition of an observatory must not lower the availability of the hydroacoustic system. So the primary limitation to an observatory is the shore power and data connection availability at the shore station. Most of these installations are in very remote islands with limited power and data connection capabilities, with the exception of Cape Leeuwin on the Western Australia. And technology that L3 developed for the RSN OOI observatory can be used and applied to an observatory at the hydroacoustic stations. And also additional partnering with the science community may enhance interest and investment in hydroacoustic systems. So for conclusions, improved installation methods allow better trunk cable routing and installation for hydroacoustic systems, and installation of hydroacoustic systems in more severe weather. The capabilities of hydroacoustic systems can be enhanced through the addition of data and power connections along the trunk cable. Observatory design is based mainly on the shore station capabilities, and observatory infrastructure facilitates easier and faster hydroacoustic system replacement for new and next generation hydroacoustic systems. Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Ryan. Questions?
I have one.
Yes, Georgios.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for the very comprehensive presentation. One clarification, you mentioned at the beginning that for the IMS stations, new calculations indicated an upgrade of the design life from 20 to 100 years. That's what you said.
Yes.
Could you please elaborate a little bit on this?
Yes.
And how effective this can be retrospectively, or is this for the new stations only? I think we need to elaborate on this point. Thank you.
Okay, so for the question for the change to the 100-year design life, we reanalyzed the system and looking at the electrical components that were installed even back at Diego, the first system. The electrical systems in the meantime between failures, basically the The failure, the possibility of failure rate for the electrical system will increase over time. However, we don't expect a failure to occur. These have gone through burn-in, they've been operating. There might be a failure, but we can't really predict when it will be. It's going to be, I think there was a 130-year mean time between failure for the electrical systems. And then on the mechanical side, the node structure, the weldments, we see about over a 300-year until the no weldments will fail due to corrosion. Once you're down at depth, the conditions are actually very benign based on the materials that we've selected for the structure. Really the limiting factor is water permeation through the O-ring seals into the a few air-filled cavities.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, let's move on to the next talk. Mario Zempoli will talk about Monte Carlo simulation tool for maritime operations risk reduction and enhancement of IMS hydroacoustic network sustainment.
Thank you, Bruce. So this is a presentation that is co-authored by the group of authors here with Yorgos Sarabus, Jerry Stanley, and Jim Matila at CTBTO, and this group at APL University of Washington, with whom we have worked on several aspects of station design concepts for modular stations and possible use of wet main connectors. So Kevin Williams, Suzanne Dickinson, who's an oceanographer, Jeff Cram, and Mike Harrington. So we will not dwell a lot on the IMS hydroacoustic network description, because by this point in the time this morning you will know it better than anybody else. It's been shown already a few times, as well as the schematic of the station. But one key point is that the locations where the CTBTO IMS hydroacoustic stations are placed are known to be characterized by very rough ocean conditions. And in this sense, it is a key parameter, as you have heard in the presentation before. Ship time, having a ship there, bringing it there and using it there, is by far the biggest cost when you do an installation like this. And you want to be able to evaluate a little bit how many days you might spend longer in a given location doing the task that you have planned than originally planned because of the weather. And this we found can be done when we started to develop the HA04 Crozet project, that this can be done using oceanographic data and doing Monte Carlo simulations of the mission. Then later, in a second stage, this work was expanded, this general idea, and made more sophisticated in what we now call MMTS, Monte Carlo Mission Time Simulation Tool, to support weather risk-based planning of maritime operations, which are relevant to us, but you will see that they might be such a method might be of interest to anybody who's doing weather-dependent operations, and so we will go into that. And this was the tool that was then developed by the APL group, and here are the conclusions. So this you know by heart now. You will just notice that these H hydrophone stations are, of course, all in remote locations, most in the southern hemisphere. This, you have just seen how the layout of a station is. And so, as you've seen in the previous presentation, this needs to be deployed starting from the shore. The ship lowers down the cable, and then in the end lowers the hydrophone triplet. And these missions depend, of course, as you've seen in the stern acceleration plots that Mario Pro showed before, and these things are very, very careful considerations that go into this. And for example, you might remember, as was mentioned in the previous presentation, the raising of the deployment limit from Beaufort 5 to Beaufort 6 for Crozet, which was rendered necessary by the ocean conditions that we know and are familiar with in that area by now. So here you see one plot from the NOAA WaveWatch 3 ocean reanalysis product, which shows here it's just a snapshot of a representative day during the year, during the austral winter in July. And this is significant wave height. So for those who are not familiar with the term, significant wave height is a statistical characterization of the wave height, because when you're at the ocean, waves can be large and small, and they come in packets, and it can be quite messy. So the significant wave height is defined as the height, the average height of the highest third of the waves in the wave field. And you can see here, this can become quite intense down here when you start to look at significant wave heights of about 6 meters. Might seem surprising, but it is really not. For a place like Cape Lewin, has also some pretty wild conditions, simply because it is all this mess that goes around the Antarctic, these very strong weather systems that sometimes throw something to up here. A place like Diego Garcia is much more easy, and you can see it in this table, which does over 2 months period show significant wave height in meters at the different locations. So you can see the extreme conditions in the austral winter in Crozet. You can see the more benign, the more sort of average conditions in many places, and the more benign ones for great parts of the year, for example here in Diego Garcia. So this is what we have to contend with. And the other thing is, of course, it's not only in terms of averages, it can vary very wildly on a very short time scale. To give you an example, again, we will see that soon, but so this was the station in Crozet. It's about 3,000 kilometers from any other permanent human settlement up here, very remote, so when you go there, you cannot just, you must go and everything must work, and you must reduce to as much as you can the risk of breaking anything while you are installing it. So there are many constraints and many attentions that one must have. And what you need, especially one of the two most delicate operations, are the cable landing. So when the ship arrives on site and you go and pick up basically a lead line with which you pull a cable back to shore. Here are a few of the local observers that were making sure that we were doing a good job. And this requires extremely calm conditions, because if the ship here starts to move away, you see you're in a constrained bay, there's a very high risk that this thing starts being subjected to too much tension, moves around, and then it does not land where it should, or it gets even damaged. So this requires really almost flat conditions. As you have seen, you need only relatively calm conditions when you deploy the node, especially with the enhancements that were made for AGO4 Crozet, where you can go up to Beaufort 6. Pictures of the ocean surface are a little bit misleading in the sense that this might look nice and flat, but if you see, there's a video downstairs at the hydroacoustic exhibition, and you can see the stern motion that the ship has while it's putting the node overboard, and you see the size of a person that's here and how much that motion is. You understand that it is still pretty rough. But if you have a big cable ship like this, a state-of-the-art thing, which is of course horribly expensive to charter, you have a hope that you can complete your mission if you are careful, again, about all these risks. And as you see, Crozet is just placed here right in the middle of the roaring 40s, where very rapidly changing weather systems just roll over you with very short notice. So here you can see one example. This was on the, I think, the 20th, yes, the 20th of December in the morning. Jerry Stanley with the installation team arrives with a cable ship. We were here on the beach, flat like a pond. This is what our weather for we had contracted, the Maripro had contracted a very good weather forecasting service that was giving us updates a few times a day with 3 hours resolution. And we knew we had a weather window where we could work. Well, but we also knew we had to finish this by 4 p.m. because something was moving in, which was this. And I would like to call your attention. Here's the cable ship that then we had completed the cable landing, so the cable ship could go to a safer area, still attached to the cable, but hold position and not do any operations that would have needed divers in the water also, and little boats in the water and so on. And here you see, this is in knots, the anemometer on the ship. You can see here the it's coming down from here, so it is in a relatively sheltered area, but you can see by the streaks and the foam that it is really wild. And you have an average wind of about 54 knots here measured, that's about 100 kilometers an hour, and almost 150 kilometers an hour, 80 knot gusts. So this is something that came up from a morning that looked like you were on the Mediterranean to an afternoon where you know you're in the Antarctic, basically. And that's what you have to deal with when you plan and conceive such missions. So during the negotiations and the establishment of the contract for HAO4 Crozet, we tried to take a closer look at whether in this particularly challenging location we could evaluate a little bit and estimate the risks of weather delays for the envisaged operations. So there were two ingredients to this. We used historical wind data. That was the only data that we had available at that time that was given us by there was a Météo France recording station on Crozet. So they were kind enough, the French authorities, and gave us about 9 years worth of data. And the other thing was the MARIPRO installation managers. We discussed with them and they said, well, for this ship and this type of design, we envisage these different limits in knots for the different operations, landing the cable, deploying the trunk cable. So you can see preparing a shore landing and doing the shore landing has a very low limit, about 16 knots of average wind during a longer period of time during the day. Which is very difficult to obtain in Crozet statistically. Node deployment is somewhere here in the middle with between 20 and 30 knots. Deployment of the trunk cable, you can go above 30 knots, almost up to 40 knots. So we also had different options. For example, this option of increasing the maximum deployment limit to a sort of Beaufort 6 condition. So these were all things that we could analyze with something like this, because then you just had a description as a table of the operations that you would do each day, preparing the shore landing, doing the shore landing, trunk deployment, node deployment, next shore landing, and so on for installing the entire system. And then we just ran a Monte Carlo simulation on any given day during the envisaged time period, which was about November, December, January timeframe. You imagine your ship is arriving on a given day, which would be this one, for example, and it has to prepare and do the shore landing, and geez, the conditions are not good, so weather delay, weather delay, weather delay. This shows wind here, and this shows the day. So now you've waited 3 days, you can prepare for your shore landing, but then you have another bad day, and you have another weather delay, and then now finally you can do your operations, and then you can clear out of there. So this gave us the possibility to run about 400 sequence simulations and derive a probability of what the likelihood was of having up to 10 weather delays during the installation, between 11 and 20 weather delays, and then more than 20 weather delays for the different periods, and also what the most likely weather delays was. So here, for example, in December, when we planned our installation, we came up with 4 days as the most likely one. And indeed, so the baseline installation sequence for the simulation was 8 days. The actual installation sequence that was planned and run was then 7 days. But you can see here on 11 days that we were on site. These were 4 weather delays. So we matched with our computations the weather delays. We predicted them actually fairly well after the fact. We could verify that, and that brought us then to work with APL, and they made something much more sophisticated. They used significant wave-height data, as we've seen from WaveWatch 3, which can give you a resolution of 3-hour time intervals with about a 60 by 60 kilometer resolution at the equator. It's even narrower down in the Crozet area, for example. And then the same tabulated at-sea operations, each with its weather threshold, and then you can also choose the type of ship, a simpler, less performing vessel of opportunity, or a cable ship with different ship characteristics, and the thresholds for each operational step. And so doing this, you can input in the tool the mission in this way. Then the characteristics of the wave field are studied using the WaveWatch data, and many thousands, like 5,000 realizations here of the wave field are predicted, are obtained. And these random wave field realizations, which then represent the ocean climate in that area, are the basis for running the Monte Carlo simulations in thousands of realizations, and you get probabilistic estimates of the number of mission days and consequently weather delays that you have in that area for that mission. And for example, in a project where we looked at different possibilities of, where APL looked at different possibilities of modularizing future node and triplet designs to allow enhanced maintenance and sustainability and things like that, you could see that, for example, at Crozet, with a vessel of opportunity, here's just to show you that, well, the prediction of weather delays, the statistical one, shows you that all these things, when you get up to 30, 40 mission days, is completely unrealistic and not obtainable. Other missions are obtainable. You change the ship for the same mission, and you see that everything drops down, and now many of the operations become realizable, and some are really just like very, very simple and easy maintenance tasks that you could envisage. So it was used for guiding the study that APL was doing on selecting different design options and different concepts for possible future modular nodes and hydroacoustic systems. But so, just very quickly, the conclusions. We've seen that maritime operations are very sensitive to ocean conditions. It's quite reasonable to understand that. But there are nowadays meteor ocean products like WaveWatch 3 that give really good characterizations of the ocean conditions as a function of location and time, with nice spatial and time resolutions, and can be used as inputs to Monte Carlo simulations, basic emission simulations, which in our case can help evaluate at the concept stage a given design or a given intervention, the different alternatives, assessing the feasibility, the operational feasibility of the things, of the operations that one intends to conduct, and also to assist in the detailed planning of the mission and the choice of vessel and the mission time frames. If you want to go in one place, maybe in April, because you have a ship available in April, and that you might find out that there's just not the time to do that. Of course, this can be applied also more widely to any type of maritime operation, and also one could envisage approaches like this to whichever activities weather dependent. So this is a little bit the message. For us, it's been useful so far, and we're quite glad we did the effort. So this concludes my presentation.
Thank you. We'll take a question, but think about it. First, we have the 1-minute poster presentations immediately following. Could I ask the poster presenters to come up here and get ready for that, please? I think we have 4, I believe. Okay, so now a question. Crystal clear, huh?
There is one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mario. Very nice presentation.
Thanks, Lars.
In the typical IMS station setup, is what you do when also a variable, or is that fixed? So, I mean, can you first deploy a node and then do the...
No, that is all fixed.
That's fixed.
Yes, in the stations as they are now, it is fixed, but one should also say that it is very efficient and very fast, because they can get the triplet down in 24 to 30 hours, which is remarkable. But again, there are breakpoints, so you might say, well, I'm deploying them, and in Crozet that happened. They deployed the trunk cable, and then at one point they held on for more than a day before starting deploying the north triplet, because you can hold on to trunk cable without risking too much to break it, but you're in very bad shape if you have deployed one node and you have to hold on to the other node somewhere there in the middle of the water column with the weather going wild. So that's where considerations like these can help. Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's begin the posters. The first person could come up.
Yeah, you can call the P3 or whatever.
P3 poster, I think. P. And let me remind you that this session, Properties of the Ocean, will continue this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. in this room. So please come back to finish the session then.
Hello everyone, and my colleague. I'm Matsumoto from Jamstec. And this study was conducted with Hydrax's team of IMS division of CTBTO. This study is focusing on the Hydrax signals originated from the volcanic islands of south of Japan. And in last September, a lot of Hydrax signals could be picked up by HA11 wake islands. So, and we investigate the direction of arrival or DOA of the signals. And some of them are associated with the volcanic activity of target volcanoes. And then we discuss how we discriminate between undersea volcanic eruptions and volcanic earthquakes. And for more details, let's come and discuss. Thank you.
Good. Next, P4, I think.
Thank you. Good morning. I think you probably got the sense of the presentation of this poster here from previous presentations this morning. It's about the event that was detected by the CTBTO IMS station H10 and HA04 related to the loss of the Argentine submarine in the southern Atlantic Ocean. The main thing here is that the signal was detected over a range of more than 6,000 kilometers, and it undergoes a totally different environment, underwater environment, and that has an impact on the received signals, of course, and that's shown in the middle panel right here. One thing you notice is that there's a huge time dispersion of the signal received on H04. The same can be concluded from the spectrograms shown on the right panels. And one additional feature is that you get a very strong low-frequency cutoff. We think we can assist classification and detection by including physics in this, and that's based on pure modeling. If you want to know more about this, please come and visit our poster.
Thank you, Peter. P5.
Good morning. My name is Luba Dimova. I'm from Bulgaria. This study is a collaboration between University of Bologna, Italy, and our university. We present numerical simulations of tsunamis generated by earthquakes in order to assess the tsunami hazard on the coast of Karpathos Island, southern Aegean Sea. To do this, we selected 3 seismic sources referring to historical earthquakes. In addition, we built one unique aggregated scenario, which means we take the maximum value reached in each node of the building grids. In addition, we built 4 nested grids in order to assess the inundation zone. So if you're interested, please visit my poster number 5. Thank you.
And P7.
Good morning. My name is Albert Brouwer. This work is done with VDEC data. I used to be VDEC support engineer and supported you in the past. Now I have a VDEC contract. And this is about looking at seismic surveys, the air gunning, and trying to get a sensitive detection, because these surveys can impact the detection capability of the IMS stations, hydroacoustic stations. So we applied the subsurface detection method to hydroacoustics, and this involves computing a basis from a set of templates using singular value decomposition. Now, the trick there is getting the templates and aligning them well. And so turning this theory into practice, which works, as you can see, you can do detections with a very high signal-to-noise ratio. That's where the poster comes in, and I'll guide you through all the steps if you come to poster 7. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Okay, this concludes this portion of the session, but I remind you again to come back at 14:30 to complete the session. Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Is the room going to be used by somebody else in the meantime? Between now and when we have the last 2 presentations, at 2:30. Check my program. Yeah. If it's not going to be used, we might as well leave here the names. Okay. Yeah. I think that.
I'll leave it for now. I'll check
Yeah.
the
Yes.
program and come back.
Because I don't see anything happening in this room in the middle. But can you please check the program?
Yeah. Please verify that.